Welcome to the Highly Sensitive Podcast. I'm Lauren LaSalle, and I'm a former therapist, a highly sensitive person, and a boundary and self-care coach for highly sensitive people. My goal for this podcast is to create a feeling of community, be a supportive place for HSPs, and to normalize our experiences as highly sensitive people, because I'm pretty sure we've all spent way too much time feeling like we're weird or don't fit in. Well, guess what? Here you fit in perfectly. This podcast will give you tools to better understand yourself, help you learn how to care for yourself as an HSP, and how to view your sensitivity as a strength. So thank you so much for being here and for joining me, and let's begin. Hello, everybody. So today I'm just going to get right into the episode. It is May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I'm sure a lot of you are already aware of that, but in case you're not, now you are. So I figured for this episode, it would be great for me to really share my story with mental health. And I know I've sort of talked about it a little bit here and there in different episodes, but I've never really shared my story. And I think a lot of you will be able to relate to at least parts of my life and me. And so I'm excited to share this with you. I also just want to let you know that if the audio in different parts sort of sounds a little bit different, it might be because I'm just doing this like from my brain. I have not written anything down, so I might decide to go back and talk a little bit about something else in between two sections that I already recorded. So if the audio sounds a little bit different, that's why. So anyway, where do I begin? So I guess I'll start when I was little. I think probably like a lot of highly sensitive children, I was very particular about things. I needed, for some reason, to have the tip of my socks pulled out away from my foot and then folded over on top of my toes. Now, I think maybe it's because I didn't like the feeling of the seams, but I really couldn't for sure tell you what that was about. I also had some blankets and I liked them being put on top of me in a particular order. Again, no idea what that was about. And I also remember, and this is still sort of a thing for me, I really can't stand the feeling of sand getting in my bathing suit, which definitely happened a lot more when I was younger. But those are all, I think, pretty typical signs of a highly sensitive child. And on top of that, I was very expressive. I did not keep how I was feeling inside, at least at home. In public or at school, that was a totally different story. I was very quiet, very, very much kept to myself. But at home, I definitely let my family know how I was feeling. I was very expressive. My parents had no idea what it meant to be highly sensitive. I mean, they know what it means to be highly sensitive because they both are, but they didn't know that that was a thing back then. And so none of us knew that we were highly sensitive. My parents just knew that I had a lot of really big, intense feelings. I had trouble communicating them. I had trouble dealing with my really big feelings as well. And I had a lot of sensory issues, I guess you could call them, we didn't know that these were all related, that these were all part of one thing that is a part of who I am. So anyway, I will say that a lot of my teachers growing up said that I was very creative and bright and that I was very quiet. And so being quiet for a lot of my life, I thought was a bad thing. And why was I quiet at school? I felt sometimes sort of anxious to speak up. I was afraid of saying the wrong thing a lot of the time. Even if I knew the answer, I wouldn't want to speak up. Most of the time, I just really like to absorb what's going on. I like to take things in and process them, which again, part of being a highly sensitive person is really deeply processing things. And so I would be very, very focused and attentive at school for all of my schooling, but I did not really speak. I did not really participate. And I think that was held against me by some teachers. And now looking back, I really think that was unfair of them. I get that being a teacher is very difficult. You have a lot of students that you have to attend to. And I really wish that some of them had tried to really get to know me and figure out what was going on instead of taking away points for my grade because I didn't participate, even though I was more attentive than probably most of the rest of the class, but that didn't count for anything. Anyway, clearly I still hold a little bit of resentment and anger toward that part of my childhood and schooling. But anyway, so I have always been a bit of a perfectionist. I say a bit, but a lot. I have pretty much always had some level of anxiety and nervousness. And so that sort of brings me, I guess, to being a teenager. And so I know I've mentioned in other episodes that my parents and I were very close. We still are very close. We're closer than we ever have been now that I'm an adult and we can talk about things that happened in my childhood. But they did not understand me. I did not know how to get them to understand me. I often did not feel heard, and we clashed a lot. And so that was very difficult. I know they did the best they could, and they did a lot better than maybe some people would have in that situation. So I'm very grateful for that. They are always very supportive of me and will do whatever they can to help me. And so when I was maybe 16, I think, 16 or 17, I honestly, a lot of high school is a blur because maybe I was depressed. I had a friend who would sometimes say, "Oh, remember when we did this? Remember when this happened?" And I had no recollection of that whatsoever. And I'm really thinking that part of that is because I was in such sort of isolated type of mood. I was very withdrawn and inside of myself a lot when I was diagnosed with depression. And I was also very much living in fight or flight. I feel like a lot of the time I was very depressed, very anxious. It somehow did not impact my schoolwork. I still did really well at school. I still did extracurriculars. I think a lot of people had no idea what I was dealing with, how I was feeling. I had an exchange student friend, I think our junior year, and she, I think, told me that I was one of the happiest people that she's ever met. And I was very, very depressed at the time. And that's just really stuck with me because it's amazing how we can hide those dark feelings and those dark times from people so easily sometimes, even to people that we're close with. It can be hard for them to really know what's going on if we don't tell them and don't show them. And that's not to say that I wasn't happy some of the time. I had a really good time with my friends. I had good times during those times. And I think that's a common misconception that when you are depressed, that's it. But you can have other feelings. Maybe they weren't as strong as my positive feelings are now, but they were still there. There were still times that I was having fun and I was happy. So I'm trying to think, because I really don't remember too much from that time. It was from my mid to late 20s to it was from my mid to late teens to my early 20s that I was depressed. I was in high school, finished high school, graduated. I went to college the following fall, and I didn't make it through the fall semester. I was having a really hard time. My roommate and I did not get along. Like, she pretty much ditched me the first day. Everybody was hanging out with their roommates and she was just kind of like, bye, and took off. And I remember there was another time that she had invited a couple friends to stay in our room on the floor, and she didn't tell me. So I just came back to my room and there are these random people sleeping on the floor. And I was like, what is this? This is not okay. And so that, on top of just the place I was in mentally and emotionally, I ended up having to go home and not finish the semester. And this was very much needed, but very difficult to come to terms with for me in a way, because I had been pretty much a straight A student my whole life. So feeling like I, in a way, was failing or like dropping out of college, even though I knew I wanted to go back at some point, that was difficult. And so I ended up coming home, and then the following semester I went back and I completed the semester. I think. I honestly don't remember totally how this went, but there was a lot of stopping and starting. So this was at the same school. And then I tried to do a class or two during the summer to sort of catch up, and that didn't go well either. And so I again had to drop out of that class and go home. And so this timeline, like I said, is super fuzzy to me. But when I was at home, I was in my room a lot of the time, watching TV shows, going online. I was trying to connect with other people who were depressed and anxious. And I mean, I guess luckily for me, in a way, that was easy back then. At that time, there was Facebook. Not as much stuff as there is now, but there were still a lot of ways to connect with other people. So I spent a lot of my time doing that and just feeling like I was stuck. I was on medication for a lot of this time, I think. I don't honestly remember which ones I was on, which ones worked, but it is a trial and error when it comes to antidepressants and that kind of thing. So I know I tried some, it didn't work. I tried another one, didn't work. Found the right combination that did seem to work. And I also was going to therapy at this time too, at least while I wasn't in college. And looking back, the therapist was not a good fit for me. I never really felt 100% comfortable with her. But my parents and I didn't really understand at that time that it's okay to find a new therapist. So I sort of just felt like I had to stick it out. I didn't really realize I could say this isn't working and find a new one. So it was all just sort of a big mess. And what ended up helping me the most was going to a DBT group, which is dialectical behavior therapy. It was created to help people with borderline personality disorder, which I do not have. I did when I was younger. In high school, at the end of high school, I thought I was diagnosed, or I thought I had borderline personality disorder because I had learned about it in psych class. But it turns out I just had really intense anxiety that sort of had similar patterns and characteristics. So that's fun. So I had told my therapist that I thought I had that, and she didn't really say no. She didn't really say yes. She just said sort of like, well, here's a DBT group, which actually it was very helpful, and I'm very grateful for it. I learned a lot of skills that really helped me get through being depressed and really anxious. And I felt like I should say a little bit about what my relationships were like during this time. I had a few boyfriends while I was depressed, and even the one that I had after, I was no longer depressed, no longer super anxious. They weren't very healthy relationships. I was bringing patterns from my life into these relationships, or somehow searching people out where I could repeat these patterns that I sort of had growing up, where I felt like it was normal to have a lot of conflict and to argue a lot. And I didn't know how to communicate very well. I didn't know how to express my needs very well. I didn't know how to set boundaries. And I also was pretty distrustful of my boyfriends. A lot of the time it was valid, like I picked up on things. So nothing had necessarily happened yet, but I sort of picked up on things where I could feel like something would happen. And oddly enough, that did end up happening. So whether that happened because I sort of like willed it into existence by knowing that it was going to happen, or whether I was really picking up on something that was actually going to end up happening, who knows? But anyway, so my romantic relationships were pretty difficult. And I thought that I was the problem. I thought that the issues that we had were because of me, when really, I mean, obviously partially it was me because there are two people, but I was not finding people who respected me, who respected my needs and my wishes, who would work with me instead of, it felt like they were against me a lot of the time. Things were either really good or they were really not good. So that was pretty difficult. And luckily now my husband is exactly the person that I was trying to find that whole time. But I think I needed to go through all of this to realize and to appreciate him. And so sometimes if you feel like, why am I in the situation, or why did I go through that? Sometimes it can teach you something, teach you big lessons that you can carry on in the future. And so I am sort of glad I was in those relationships, because it, I think, helped lead me to my husband, helped me learn how to be in a healthy relationship. And yeah. And so as far as college went, I, at some point, went to another college, a community college, so I could live at home and take a couple classes. And I did, I believe, finish a few classes there. And then I was going to try the next semester and again decided that it wasn't right for me. And so at that point, I kind of felt like I have no idea what I'm doing. I feel miserable all the time. I don't know what to do with my life. I don't know if I'll finish college, which never had really been an option in my brain for me before. And so I started seeing actually a new therapist. I only saw her for like a month or two. She's amazing. If you want to look her up, her name is Lynn Lyons, and she really knows her stuff when it comes to anxiety with children. So she's amazing. She really helped me in the short time that I saw her. We figured out some goals, some action steps that I could do. I applied for a part-time job. I got the part-time job, and that really helped give me some purpose. And around that same time, I had decided that I was done being depressed. And this seems really weird to me now that I think about it, but I got out of that depression because I decided I was done. And I said, I'm done with this. I want to live my life. I'm done feeling this way. I'm done feeling trapped in my room. I'm done. And then I was done. And I weaned myself off my medication, which I 1000% do not recommend doing. Do not do that. Do not do that. Consult your healthcare professional who is prescribing the medication if you are going to get off of it. But anyway, I did that. And so then I had this part-time job. And then I later decided to go back to college. And I did it. And I only had 3 years left because I had classes that I'd already taken and received credits from. And so I went to college. I was a little bit older than everybody, but that didn't matter. And I graduated, and it was amazing. And at that point, I could not believe how far I had come because I was not feeling depressed. I was able to manage my anxiety, and I had graduated from college, which I at some point had thought that was not going to happen. So fast forward a little bit, I'm still doing great. Had another job. Still wasn't really sure what I was going to do with my life, like what kind of job I would really be happy doing continuously, because I had gone to school for theater with a minor in psychology. So I think having that kind of degree is really beneficial. I learned so much from doing theater, and that could be a whole separate episode. But anyway, so I was working at a school for kids that cannot be in regular public schools because they have a whole variety of different emotional, developmental, physical needs. And I loved that job. I worked there for a year before I had to quit because I kept getting sick and I used up all my sick time. And the job was full time, which I have learned that I cannot do because after about a year like this, I get sick all the time because my body I just can't handle that. And I think a lot of HSPs find the same thing. And so I thought about it, and then I decided to go to grad school to become a therapist. And I thought, if I don't do this, I really don't know what I'm going to do for work. And so I did that. And I mean, it's all just gone uphill really from there. So I think I discovered what high sensitivity was or it was around the time that I started my master's program, if I remember correctly. It might have been a little bit before. So I discovered this. I read the Highly Sensitive Person book by Elaine Aron, and I thought, I think as so many of us do, wow, I cannot believe this perfectly describes me. This is amazing. And that was kind of that. And I didn't really do much with it, with that knowledge at the time that I discovered that I was highly sensitive. And it wasn't until later when I was practicing therapy that I sort of got back into that, and I started noticing traits of being highly sensitive in my clients, and I was working with kids, and that sort of brought it back to myself as well, and figuring out what I needed as a highly sensitive person. And so this is fast forwarding ahead a little bit, and I'll get back into the chronological story after this, but so I knew sort of what I needed to feel good and to not feel drained and depleted all the time. And so I finally, when I left my job as a therapist, I had like a whole month almost where I wasn't really working because I had moved to doing telehealth with adults, and I didn't really have much of a caseload at all for the first month. And so I got to figure out what I needed to do for myself during the day. I got to get back that energy and just feeling not mentally and physically exhausted anymore. That month really helped me so much. I got to do projects around the house that I had been putting off because I just didn't have the time or energy to do them before. It was amazing. And then once I did start building my caseload, I was able to build it and have as many clients as I felt good having, which was great. So I had a number that felt good, a number of clients during the day. I had to make sure that I had time in between client meetings so that I could just recharge, decompress. And during this time, I was really able to figure out what I needed as a highly sensitive person, what kind of work-life balance, what kind of downtime, what kind of creativity I needed to help myself feel happy and content and just enjoy life and not feel drained all the time. So that was a really great experience because now I have a daughter and I'm not able to do all of those things anymore. So being able to figure that out before becoming a parent, I think was really, really helpful for me. Okay, so now I'll go back to where I left off. I graduated from my master's program. I became a therapist, and then we got married, and then I got burnt out on being a therapist. And I said, I really don't know what I'm going to do, because I was contractually sort of stuck there. I would owe them a bunch of money because of becoming licensed for the supervision hours toward becoming licensed. And I didn't know what else I was going to do for work. And so I decided to start my own coaching business, which is what I have now, and to do telehealth part-time. And so my husband has been really great with all of my weird job leavings. Like when I was working at that school, I just left without having another job lined up because I just couldn't do it anymore. And so he's been so supportive with those things. And so I did that. And then I decided I didn't want to be a therapist anymore because it costs a lot of money. You have to put a lot of money into it for continuing education, licensure fees, and that kind of thing every 2 years, at least in New Hampshire. And I knew that the amount of hours I would be working once our daughter was born would maybe even out with what I was putting into it, or I would be barely making any money. So I decided not to do that and just do my coaching business. And then, like I said, we had a daughter, and this is exactly the life that I wanted. Some of things I couldn't have predicted, like having my own business, having this podcast. I mean, I didn't know what podcasts were when I was back in high school. But the other day, it was so beautiful out. The windows were open. I was at the sink doing dishes. My daughter and I had just made mini M&M cookies. I could hear the chickens in the backyard. The outdoors just smelled so good. And I was in such a good mood. And I just thought, man, I cannot believe that this is my life. I cannot believe that this is me. I feel like a totally different person than that depressed, anxious girl that I was. I have worked so hard to get here and to be happy with myself and to be happy with my life and to have this kind of life. And in high school, I never, ever could have imagined that I would be here. So that's sort of my story, I guess. So to finish this, if you are in that place that I was in, or any sort of version of that, find somebody who can help you. Find a therapist, find a coach, find somebody you can trust, find somebody who can be there for you and support you. And know that this is not it. It does not have to be like this forever. Hang in there, and things can get better, and they will get better. I think a lot of it is just about having faith and having the unwavering determination to get there. Thank you so much for listening to the Highly Sensitive Podcast. You can help support the podcast by taking a minute to rate and review it, share a favorite episode with a friend, or become a subscriber on Patreon at patreon.com/highlysensitivepodcast. Visit laurenlassalcoaching.com for free resources, information about my coaching programs, and to join my email list. You can connect with me on Instagram at Boundaries by Lauren, or email me at lauren@laurenlassalcoaching.com.